This is Shine On Policycast, the podcast that brings you EU policy updates relevant to solar. I'm your host Bethany. Let's get started. So I'm here with guest Carmen Correas-Lopes, our policy advisor here at SolarPower Europe, who specialises in solar manufacturing. And we have a tradition on the podcast this year of bringing a prop. Our guests bring a prop, they describe what it is, and I have to try and make the link with the subject that they're talking about. So welcome, Carmen. I see you've brought something shiny. What have you got there if you want to describe for the listeners if people aren't watching?
So thank you, Beth. Indeed, I brought a light bulb because I think it's already a complex object that can bring many good things. So it has a lot of potential, but it has to be properly used in order to bring light. Voilà. So shall I do the connection or can you guess?
I think I can. I mean, if we're talking support mechanisms for manufacturing, I mean, we have plenty of light bulbs, but like the light bulb that you have in your hand right now, it's not plugged in, so there's no light. It's not useful yet. And that's maybe the case for some of the support mechanisms that we have for solar manufacturing.
Perfect. Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing the prop. So then on solar manufacturing and on support for solar manufacturing in Europe. So it's been around 5 months since the official adoption into law of the Net Zero Industry Act, or the NZIA as we call it, which is wild because I think we both remember when it was introduced a couple of years ago. And the Net Zero Industry Act sets a goal of having 30 gigawatts of manufacturing at every step of the supply chain by 2030. So 30 gigawatts from polysilicon, 30 gigawatts inverter, 30 gigawatts ingots, modules, wafers. So what does the NZIA mean then for Europe, or what are we hoping that it means for Europe?
Mm-hmm. So indeed, it was finally approved in June this year, which were great news because the discussions were very intense over 1 year already, since we saw the proposal from the Commission in 2023. I think there's some things that could have been improved, but overall it's okay, it's fine. Let's see how member states execute this Net Zero Industry Act. I believe it could be one of the main solutions. As you said, it sets targets of 30 gigawatt across the whole supply chain by 2030, which is already very ambitious, but might happen if we do things properly. Just to give a number, according to the European Solar Industry Alliance estimation, we need between 4 to 6 billion euros over 10 years to support the industries in Europe for PV manufacturing. And this can be
done... Is that per year?
Yes, per year, over 10 years.
Yeah.
And this can be done by two kinds of policies, as you can find in the report, which is, first of all, measures to support the supply and measures to support the demand. On the supply side, we have direct incentives to the industries, but also mechanisms that we already know in Europe, like the Innovation Fund or state aid, among others. And on the supply, we have the Net Zero Industry Act on its own that can provide visibility to the off-takers and so that they can already use some made-in-EU components positively for their own panels. Yeah. So we can dive into it later maybe, but I think that the Net Zero can be the key tool for this industrialization of Europe.
And then maybe related to kind of some of these support mechanisms, and it's another anniversary. It's 6 months since the EU Solar Charter, which was, I think, 23 member states signed, and with the pledge to support solar manufacturing. And we, in kind of to mark the 6 months of the Solar Charter being in place, we've come out with a state of play report for kind of summarising all the different mechanisms supporting European manufacturing or not. And that's a report that you can find on our website from whenever this podcast is live. So then the European Solar Charter, maybe you can give us a bit of a summary of what it is and why it matters and what it does and what we hope it will do.
Exactly. So it was signed in April this year. Also very ambitious. We had the chance of having 23 member states signing it, but also many companies, over 60, companies signing commitments and concrete actions. First of all, I would say the Solar Charter is a living mechanism. It's not just a paper. We expect a revision anytime soon, and we're in close contact with the companies and with the member states to see how they executed the commitments that they signed. So indeed, one of the commitments from the 23 member states was to launch pilot auctions ahead of the Net Zero Industry Act that will be compulsory as of now for public procurement and as of 2025 for auctions. And then some examples of these pilot auctions come from countries such as Austria or France. In Austria, for example, in the context of the Renewable Energy Expansion Act, investments can already be paying over 20% of their investment if they include made in EU components.
Okay.
So that's already an incentive. There's also the case in France with the Pacte Solaire. There, it's, I believe, still under discussion, but should be materializing anytime soon. And they introduce, among cybersecurity, innovation, and other criteria, they include this Indus score, which is kind of like the energy score, and it gives a range of value to the PV according to the number of components they were able to manufacture in Europe.
So if you have a product that's really built in Europe from all the components, it's going to be graded A or
exactly.
green or
exactly. So it's a way of awarding those components. Those are the two examples that I can give. There's way more in the report.
So then, what are the current support schemes? I mean, you touched on a few there, but maybe we can dive into it a bit more. What are the current support schemes on offer at EU and member state level? What are some of the downfalls and challenges? I mean, are we seeing uptake of these support schemes? If not, why not? What more can be done to kind of support member states in delivering on these domestic manufacturing goals?
So we have a couple of instruments, as I was saying, a couple of light bulbs, but the main one, indeed, they can be divided in member states or a European level. On the member state level, we have the Temporary Crisis and Transition Framework, so the famous TCTF, but we don't like abbreviations, so Temporary Crisis and Transition Framework, under the state aid rules, and we see how the member states...
And maybe I just ask you to explain a bit, what state aid is and why that matters.
So, indeed, it's a mechanism that member states, after the approval of the Commission, can use nationally. And we see examples on how TCTF can be applied for. It's already approved for many clean technologies like hydrogen, batteries, wind. And then, as you will see in the report, there's 9 schemes for solar, which is an okay number. But then the conclusion is that even if there's 9 approved for solar, it not always materializes in practice. And why? Indeed, the downfalls of the state aid rules in this case, for example, would be, first of all, administrative burden. It takes a lot for companies to be able to fulfill the requirements. Then sometimes, in some cases, they include geographical conditions that do not benefit at all the industries in sur place, so in the country itself. And then I would say the main issue is that state aid doesn't include OPEX support, which is the main issue for the industries at the moment. So in SolarPower Europe, we're advocating for less administrative burden, more OPEX support because at the moment there's none, and also of course as well extending these rules over 2025 because time is crucial and they're approved. They're not being used. We have to expand them for them to become real.
And then you mentioned the innovation funds.
Exactly. So state aid would be for national level, but then at the European level, we have the mechanism of the innovation fund that we're all kind of familiar with. We see how for solar, it's an okay number. So 3 or 4 projects were approved under innovation fund in the last call, which is fine. It's okay, but it's not scaling enough. It doesn't seem to be the mechanism. Some factories have used it, and it will be crucial in the call of 2024, but it's not been enough to scale up the factory in the long term. As we propose to target a bit better the innovation fund, kind of like what's happening with the hydrogen bank, but for solar, and then maybe also put in some factors such as further awarding innovation, which is the core of Europe at the moment, of the industries. Then also maybe to give some more power to the member states, not only to the European Union. So they are also the ones that put in money, because they're the ones benefiting from it. We have a very good description of this mechanism under our website. It's called the Solar Manufacturing Facility. So I recommend our listeners to go read it. Some members of the Parliament and the Council and the Commission, they're picking it up. So we hope to see it.
That makes sense. I mean, you have a lot of technology-specific funds and batteries funds, chips funds, hydrogen fund. So we're going to decarbonize on the basis of solar. We should probably have something dedicated to our technology too.
Exactly, and also because everybody talks about the specificity of the solar supply chain. So indeed, we're very dependent, and we have to be addressed differently, right?
Makes sense. So, I mean, the reason we're doing this and the reason we're talking about this today is because we've really seen European manufacturers struggle in the last year. Maybe after 2020, there was a bit of a re-emergence of European manufacturing, but certainly in the last year, we've seen a lot of challenges. So the solutions you're talking about here, I mean, you mentioned already the issue of speed. What sort of short-term support can there be in the meantime for those factories who are really struggling to keep the lights on or to keep their staff on books?
So we have short-term measures such as the fact that the member state can consider state aid guarantees for the factories in the very short term, but there's some others that are going to be crucial, like the Net Zero Industry Act, through pilot auctions now in the coming months. As I said, Austria, France, but also Italy and Spain have some mechanisms already, or at least are discussing. And then state aid, indeed, OPEC support through state aid. We are also in contact with the EIB to see how they can support for innovation, for example.
Right. Because, I mean, the EIB, they backed the Catania 3-Sun plant, right, in Italy. So,
exactly.
It's possible.
Exactly. So the EIB and the Innovation Fund were a very good solution for Catania, for 3-Sun.
Yeah.
So things like that.
It's all possible. So it remains a very live topic, and the Net Zero Industry Act, well, it's out and it's in the books. There's a few pieces of things to look out for coming up. I mean, what sort of dates and timescales are we looking into the future now for solar manufacturing?
So indeed, I would say, as we have been saying in our offices, but whenever we talk to the legislators, time is very important, and we've been discussing already a lot. Factories are closing as we speak, nearly. So I would say that crucial now is the application of the Implementing Act whenever it comes.
That's the Implementing Act for the Net Zero Industry Act.
Yes, indeed. Sorry.
Catchy.
It's quite long as a name, but so we're expecting the Commission to publish the Implementing Act rules in March 2025, but member states can, as I said, already apply pilot auctions. So that as soon as possible. And then once the Implementing Act for Net Zero is in place, already executed as efficient as possible and also as unified across member states. That would be the thing that I'm looking forward the most to solve the situation, which is critical.
So we do have, as I said, we've got the State of Play report on our website. I'd encourage our listeners to check it out. But for wider reading and for following what we're up to, what do you suggest our listeners turn to?
Yeah, so thanks to our colleagues in comms, we have a couple of channels that listeners can go through. The Solar Manufacturing Matters. It's a channel that I believe you can follow in LinkedIn already. We have the Make Solar EU as well, with regular updates on news on the manufacturing facilities opening or announcements from the institutions. And then, yes, there's another tool that I really like in our website called the Solar Manufacturing Map, when you can see interactively and updated each year how it looks like, the map in EU, like where the factories are, and also divided per segment. So, okay, this factory here, they're manufacturing inverters. Interesting, So, and I personally try to update as well in my profile whenever there's something that might be useful.
And we can find you on LinkedIn?
Yes, Carmen Correas-Lopes.
Super. Well, thanks so much, Carmen, for your insights today and for this very important report that I urge everyone again to check out, read. And thanks again for joining us in Policycast today.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks to colleagues.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. This podcast is brought to you by SolarPower Europe. If you don't want to miss our next episode, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Shine on.